Hello, and welcome to the 404 Media Podcast, where we bring you unparalleled access to hidden worlds both online and IRL. 404 Media is a journalist-founded company and needs your support. To subscribe, go to 404media.co. As well as other bonus content, subscribers can hear us answer their questions in future podcasts. Ask us anything you want on podcast at 404media.co. I'm your host, Joseph, and with me are most of 404 Media co-founders, the first being Sam Cole.
Hello.
Emmanuel Mayberg.
Hello.
And Jason Kebler unfortunately has COVID. We salute him. He can't make it, but I absolutely want him to rest rather than coming on here and, putting all the effort in when he really needs to sleep. So I imagine Jason will be back next week.
We pray.
I imagine, we'll see. It's obviously very unfortunate. But to get to this week, the first half, we're going to talk about a couple of stories around the continuing Israel-Palestine conflict. Look, obviously, we're not war reporters, right? We're technology reporters, and that's the frame of reference and the background that we come into this from. But we think there's some stuff of particular value here because it touches on content moderation, open source intelligence, social media, all of that sort of stuff. All of this is now inextricably linked to conflicts, be that Ukraine, Russia, or here, Israel, Palestine. So the first one, this is from Sam. Instagram is... Sorry, I almost laughed at the quote in the headline. That's why I'll read it straight. Instagram sincerely apologizes for inserting terrorist into Palestinian bio translations. Sam, what was happening here exactly? What is this translation error?
Yeah, the headline is so absurd because it's just a ridiculous thing. Like, Instagram is very sorry.
Very
And then
sorry
explained
for,
no
for
further.
wading into a conflict. Yeah,
Right, yeah,
so
oopsie,
stupid.
big oops. Yeah, so basically, I just to walk you through how I came across this personally. Last week, I saw a TikTok where someone was talking about their friend who's Palestinian had in their Instagram bio, their bio said Palestinian and then the Palestinian flag emoji, and then Arabic script which said Alhamdulillah, which is a statement of like praise. It means like praise be to God or praise to Allah. And when you hit the little C translation button that Instagram puts in bios, it translated that entire phrase to, including like the emoji and everything. It said, praise be to God, Palestinian terrorists are fighting for their freedom, which is obviously horrifying. That's not at all what it said. That's a really, Islamophobic and racist thing to put in someone's bio automatically. So yeah, that was where I came into the story, is this person on TikTok saying, can we get Meta's attention on this because this is obviously really fucked up.
Yeah, and we'll get to Meta's reaction in a second, but just to clarify for listeners, this was not a manual translation, done by somebody in a content moderation center for a contractor or whatever. This was a purely automatic translation in that you go to the video, it says C translation, you hit that button, and it just provides almost like a Google Translate, even though we're specifically not talking about Google. It's that sort of system, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of and I'm reading about this, some of the theories that are going around this today, but a lot of people are saying, this happened manually, like someone injected this in, someone programmed this in, someone hard coded the word terrorist to be next to Palestinian. There were people talking about like disgruntled employees, and these are all like theories that are happening on Twitter, which is, like obviously known for being deeply anti-Semitic in general. So, people are forced to make their own jumps and assumptions, and in some cases borderline conspiracies, because Meta won't say how it happened. And we have our own kind of theories just based on the way we know these systems work, but people are really confused and really disturbed because of the way just some really horrific things have been spreading around on these social media platforms during the conflict.
Yeah. Well, what did Meta say when you contacted them?
Yeah, so I said, I was like, here's this thing. Are you aware of it? And how did it happen? And they replied with a statement. They said, we fixed a problem that briefly caused inappropriate Arabic translations in some of our products. We sincerely apologize that this happened. Which in that
Okay.
statement, they don't even say what happened.
Yes, they leave that to you
Yeah,
and to everybody else. And they
exactly.
also, as you alluded to earlier, they don't explain actually what happened. They just say there was some sort of
Yeah.
error that led to these inappropriate translations. So at least
Mhm.
they're acknowledging that. But they don't say whether it was, you know, their biased data set
Yeah.
or something in the translation, I don't know, for lack of a better word, system or algorithm itself. They
Yeah.
didn't explain that.
Yeah, we know that these are automatically generated, like you said. Instagram has been talking about its own like translation generation models for a while. We also know that there's a lot of gaps in understanding about different languages. So the models are not very good when it comes to any language other than English, and especially with the Arabic. I think they've been proven to have quite a bit of gaps in knowledge of how those translations work and whether they're accurate or not, which is obviously its own bias problem. To leave out huge swath of your user base is obviously really problematic. So we can make inferences. I mean, I don't want to say for sure what happened. We're going to write a story about what researchers think happened today, which
Hmm.
is, these models are basically hallucinating what what's going on. They see a lot of content on Meta that talks about Palestinians being terrorists, which is a whole other problem, but very much related. And then the AI kind of puts these words together because it's been trained on what other people are doing on the platform. And it's like, oh well, that must go here because these words are close to each other all the time on this platform. Which again, very fucked up that that's even content that's not getting moderated appropriately. But there are a lot of theories
And
about what happened. We may never know what happened for sure. I'm sure Meta will never cop to what exactly happened.
yes,
Can
Emmanuel,
I wonder about this out loud for a
sure.
second?
Yeah.
Um, to our readers who might not know this, but we certainly have experienced this. The more professionalized a PR team is, the more adept they are at answering a question without providing any information. And this is the response that we've seen from Meta. And I am not in PR, and I don't get that kind of training, and I don't think about that kind of strategy. This is not my problem. But I really have to wonder what they gain here, other than wishing that the story goes away, which it will not because we will keep chasing it. But it seems like, and we don't know, we just have no way of knowing right now what happened. But let's say that, as some people speculate, and I want to emphasize, we have no indication that this is the case, but some people are speculating that somebody at Meta internally made this happen intentionally, right? And if that was the case, Meta could come out and say, hey, somebody sabotaged our system that doesn't work this way, and we took care of it immediately and fixed it, and this doesn't represent the company, and blah, 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 blah. Like, that seems to me like a good PR spin. And if it was an automated malfunction, if it was some sort of automated translation system at Meta that messed up, they could also say, hey, an automated system malfunctioned. We think our automated systems overall provide a lot of value, which, we all use Google Translate. It does. You know what I mean? It's a useful automated system that we all use regularly. And we found the error and we fixed it and we apologize. That also seems like a good way to just like end the discussion. But it's like the strategy that they have chosen is something bad happened. We will not tell you anything about how this happened and let theories run rampant about what went wrong here, like this very bad thing that happened, and kind of give room for people to speculate in a time when all they're doing is like speculating wildly about what is happening around this conflict. and people in different institutions supporting the conflict from or different actors in the conflict from different directions. It just seems like a bad choice to me. Is all all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Hoping it goes away for a company like Meta does not work. It's and they've been hoping that this problem goes away for a long time. Like I said, like they've had these problems with the models for a long time. And now it's blowing up in their faces in a bigger way than ever. It's like, okay, it would be like you said, it would be very easy for them to say anything at all other than oops. I mean, I kind of think maybe they don't know either how there isn't probably an easy fix. Like, it's not just like we excise the problem out of the data set or we fire a guy. It's probably much more widespread than they can even address because that's the way these models work. It's probably across all of their, every platform that Meta owns. Yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if they respond to the next stories that we have lined up about this. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy that the end result is that we have to go speak to researchers who then have to make sort of informed opinions about what happened. Like, they don't know, right? But like, there's this massive tech company, literally one of the biggest tech companies in the world, and they could just acknowledge their mistake, but they don't do that. I mean, just very, very briefly, I think you looked at what other platforms do when it comes to translation. Like, if I read it correctly, you didn't speak to these platforms, but I think you like did translations through ChatGPT. What did you find there?
Yeah, I mean, we just wanted to test because Meta won't say, what's going on. We wanted to make sure like they weren't pulling from some other model that's also making the same mistake. So we did I think we did Google Translate and ChatGPT, and we did the Alhamdulillah phrase in I think we did it in script in those systems to see if it would translate correctly, and it did. It was fine. But at the same time, it's like the problem here was the placing of the word Palestinian and the emoji and the script all together so that it would force it to translate, and then ran out this very, wrong phrase altogether. So
interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot of just like playing with it on the front end to figure out what's going on that users are doing right now.
Yeah, almost like the people trying to jailbreak ChatGPT in a way. Now we're just trying to figure out why one of the world's biggest social networks is calling Palestinians terrorists.
Right.
I look forward to the follow-up piece on that. I think you said coming soon. Let's move on to the next one. This one's from me and Emmanuel. It's the headline is "Verified OSINT accounts are destroying the Israel-Palestine information ecosystem." Emmanuel, we had a meeting at the start of this conflict. That's a week and a half ago now, maybe a little bit more. And we were discussing what the areas of coverage that we could contribute to. Again, not being war correspondents, not being on the ground, but having a lot of knowledge about the technology around conflict, which led to this piece, right? Before we get into the story, what was sort of the original idea, or maybe even like the original hypothesis? I'm having a little bit of trouble remembering what the original pitch was, but it seemed pretty close to what we ended up doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we woke up that day and we realized that for to better serve our audience and just to speak practically, it's the only thing that people care about at the moment is this conflict for good reason. And we wanted to cover it in a responsible way and in an additive way. And as you say, we're not war correspondents and we're not on the ground. Not many people are on the ground in Gaza because it is so dangerous. Literally, journalists are dying trying to cover this conflict. But we are following the story, as many people are online, which is where our expertise is and where we're embedded as reporters. And the thing that was really blowing up that day was the use of open source intelligence to try and attribute blame to this bombing of a hospital in Gaza. And what I think it brought to the forefront is something that's been brewing for a long time, and I think has been brewing, has been really boiling is the use of open source intelligence in the war in Ukraine and now in Gaza, and how what used to be a very useful practice that a few journalists and researchers used has now kind of blown up and become this game that people play online.
Yeah, exactly. So what we did was I then reached out to some of the OSINT people I know, the open source intelligence people I know. And I guess just before we go on, I should define what that is. OSINT is when you're a researcher or a journalist or, just an ordinary person, totally fine. You go and you gather information that's openly available. So that could be a Facebook post, it could be a Twitter feed, it could be Telegram. That's like the social media side. Then you have stuff more like satellite imagery, and especially how those images show change over time. Hey, there was a crater here, although there wasn't a crater here and now there is, and we can show the explosion, whatever, that sort of thing. And then sort of on the much higher end, you have people who do basically forensic analysis of like, this is how a bullet would have like moved through a wall or something like that. And that's almost going into, well, it is going into a science sort of thing. And we're not really talking about that end. We're talking more about, let's look at these images and maybe I can see, oh, the missile was here, or there's a Israeli helicopter here, or whatever it is, which a lot, as the story shows, turns out to be, quite frankly, bullshit. So I approached a bunch of OSINT people I've known for years, I've respected for a long time, and their information has been very, very useful. There's, people like Bellingcat, who actually Elliot Higgins was too busy to get back to me, but I've known him for a very long time. There's then people like Caliber Obscura, who's a weapons specialist, especially on like firearms and small arms, that sort of thing. There was another one in there who's like a geolocation wizard. I mean, everybody knows the GeoGuessr guy now, right? But like, these are the OGs of like finding, here's where a horrible ISIS attack took place or something. So they've been doing it for a really, really long time. And I asked them, like, do you think something is different now on Twitter? Because when we're scrolling through, anecdotally, 404 Media's own experience, it seems to be like a stereotypical account will be a guy in a suit as his profile picture, a verified tick, which obviously you've paid Twitter for, and then, maybe he's put OSINT in there, or his post is OSINT, or whatever. And it just reads like gobbledygook. Like, what the hell are you going on about? There doesn't seem to be any sort of expertise here. And the people who were able to get back to me replied very, very quickly, including some of those I mentioned. And all of them had the resounding sentiment that Twitter is just not the OSINT ecosystem it used to be. Whereas before, it was a small group of dedicated people who would, each had their own expertise, and they were governed by trying to find out what actually happened. And that's not to say, I'm sure there were people who had different motivations, maybe state aligned or their own biases, whatever. But Ray, generally speaking, it was pretty damn good a few years ago. Now, especially with the changes around Twitter that Elon Musk has introduced, especially with engagement and monetization, where if you're a verified user and you get more engagement from other verified users, you can create revenue. You can make thousands of dollars potentially. Their opinion, the experts I spoke to, is like, that is now the driving force behind OSINT on Twitter. And that's how we end up with these OSINT accounts that come out of nowhere, don't really have any expertise, and are just like mouthing off about this conflict. And I'm sure when the next conflict comes around, I don't know, if China invades Taiwan, God forbid, but when there is another conflict, I'm like 90% sure these people are going to jump on it as well. Emmanuel, what did you think of what the OSINT people told me? Because you basically had the hypothesis for this piece. I went out and they confirmed it all immediately. I mean, what did you think of their responses?
I mean, it's what I expected, and it's depressing And I think, Joe, it's like you said, oh, how's this going to look in the next conflict? And I think you raise a good point about all of this creating more noise, but I kind of worry about, and I think this is starting to happen now. Like, OSINT is really a useful tool. It's not the end all be all. Like I said, it's very important to have people on the ground. Like, we're not going to have the kind of confirmation we want about this hospital bombing until people are on the ground and they're able to do forensics on the ground and all that. But OSINT is useful, and I worry and I wonder if the next time there's a conflict, people will just dismiss it all, right? It's just like this tool that used to provide some value, this method that used to provide some value for people. People are just going to see, those images with the colored boxes that are trying to geolocate something, and it'll be like, oh, that's OSINT, that's bullshit, right? Because there's 100 accounts with OSINT in the username, and they're all spreading misinformation. So I'm not going to listen to any of them, and people are not going to listen to legitimately curious and rigorous analysts or open source researchers at Bellingcat and dismiss them because they're using a practice, but it's been cheapened by this economy on Twitter of people doing open source intelligence.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating point, I think, to end this section on, and something I hadn't really thought about, in that it's going to undermine the entire sector of OSINT for the for coming conflicts as well. All right, I'll leave this here and play us out for the break, but when we come back, we'll talk about a $30 million Bitcoin money laundering ring that was right in the heart of New York. We'll be right back after this. And we're back. As mentioned, we're going to be talking about Bitcoin and cash and money laundering, and New York and delis, I think, come up in there as well. The headline of this story, written by me, is inside a $30 million. Well, I was going to say dollar. Let me do that again. Inside a $30 million cash for Bitcoin laundering ring in the heart of New York. That's quite a long one. Okay, maybe that wasn't my best headline. Usually, I'm pretty good, but that
you wrote it, Joe.
Yeah, I know. But like, usually they're like, there's a pun in there or there's something good.
You're usually like, fuck yeah, I wrote that.
Yeah. I'm having an off week, I guess. Before we go into it, I'll say that this was produced in collaboration with Court Watch, which is an independent newsletter / media outlet run by Seamus Hughes, and he goes through and he digs up court records that people overlook. He's basically the wizard of PACER, which is the US court record system. So he found it, shared it with us, and I then obviously took my expertise on organized crime, money laundering, cryptocurrency, and wrote it up. So it's published on his site as well. And if you're not already, signed up for that newsletter, I would strongly recommend it. Just go there and you'll get crazy court records in your inbox every so often. Let me just give some context of why this is important, and then I'll explain a little bit about what actually happened, so you guys have some you guys can jump in. What this shows is that this is how serious criminals launder their Bitcoin outside of the ordinary exchanges like Coinbase or Binance or FTX before it imploded, right? When you think of, oh, I have Bitcoin and I'm a criminal and I need to sell it, you could just go to Coinbase, make an account, and then exchange it there. But that creates a bottleneck where there is a lot of let's say avenue for exploitation by law enforcement. They could get your IP address, they could get your passport or driver's license if you provided that, because a lot of these exchanges have KYC or know your customer requirements, So the alternative is something like this, which is laid out in the court document, which is basically the way Jason described it when he was helping me on it, is an IRL Bitcoin exchange. Like, you don't really go to a website, you arrange something over text, and then you meet them and you exchange Bitcoin for cash, and potentially the other way around as well. Let me just explain how it works exactly. So there's a group of people, and let's just call them the Ring for lack of a better way of pulling it right now. And they would get a text message from their superiors, such as, be at this location at this time, and there'll be a handover. And a person would drive there, they would arrive at the location, and someone would hand them a bag, and that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars easily in some crappy plastic bag. They then store it, or they move it, or whatever it is. That's not their money. That belongs to sort of the company. It belongs to the Ring overall. All they're doing is they're moving this cash around. And according to the court records, this Ring, its primary customers were drug traffickers, and its most wealthy clients were hackers, which I found especially interesting. Given its nexus in New York. Of course, Bitcoin is an international way of transferring money. But if you're a criminal trying to do it properly, physical cash has to exist somewhere. And in this case, it existed in New York. And I guess just the last thing I'll say about how it actually works before we move on to maybe how the FBI got involved. There was a token system. And I don't really get into the piece too much. I just do it, I think, a paragraph or two. But this is where, when they're arranging the cash pickups or the cash drop-offs, they will text to the other person or via their third party the unique serial number on a $1 note or a $5 note or something. They look at it as a unique serial number. They take a note of that. They send it. Then when the pickup happens, the person can flash that note, and it's basically like a one-time password. This way, you don't have to go, oh, hey, Jerry, I'm supposed to be meeting Jerry to pick up all the money.
Fucking Jerry, man.
Yeah, I don't know, man. That's the first name that came to my head. To be clear, none of them were called Jerry, but, one of them was called Jay. Well, maybe we should just go with that. But you do this pickup, and you flash that, and you don't have to exchange names. Yes, you'll see faces, of course, but it's like a verification method. And in this piece, I wrote that, this is a very common tactic in money laundering. And I saw some crypto bros got very mad at that. It's like, whoa, where are you saying that? It's like, dude, I have read tens of thousands of messages from money laundering rings as part of like my investigations into organized crime and, past and forthcoming. I've seen this token thing like a ton of times. This is very normal, but it shows you that, okay, this ring is interesting, and maybe they were serving some unsavory characters.
Joe, so as you say, you have covered a lot of online criminals, be it hackers or drug dealers who, communicate online, or some of their operation is digital, as any business is these days. A lot of that money is in cryptocurrency, and we see cryptocurrency stolen. We see people pay for crimes or pay for drugs in cryptocurrency. There is a lot of cryptocurrency associated with illegal activity. And I guess we don't often talk about how people cash that out. And is this the only way? And when something like this goes down, do you have any idea of like the ripple effects it has on these criminals? Like, how big of a deal is this for the FBI to take one of these down?
I think it's exceptionally rare for us to see inside one of these rings, and that is because it is pretty damn rare for the authorities to shut these down. To give listeners a little bit of context, this is absolutely not in the story, but how I've come across these rings before is that law enforcement previously hacked or took over or otherwise shut down a bunch of encrypted phone companies for criminals. These are customized phones sold nearly exclusively to organized crime. There was EncroChat. There was Sky. There was Anom. I'm not going to go into the particulars about how all they were shut down or taken over, but basically it ended up with law enforcement getting an absolute motherload of messages. And from that, they've shut down massive cartels, super cartels, drug trafficking rings. And as I've seen by literally reading the messages themselves and, obviously law enforcement's announcements, they've shut down money laundering rings that were very, very similar to this one. And I feel like we're only starting to see, as you say, the way that people cash out through crazy operations like that, or even smaller ones like this, where an informant was involved, or maybe we'll talk about in a minute. But this is almost tiny compared to like the overall drug trafficking and cash out and money laundering industry. There are other ways to do it. Look, some criminals will use Coinbase or Binance or whatever. Maybe they will open an account with KYC under a false identity. Maybe somebody else will use will set up the account and act sort of as the bottleneck, as the cash out guy. That's certainly the case in some of the criminal rings I've seen. So this IRL Bitcoin exchange is absolutely not the only way, but it is, from what I've seen and read many times, this is like how the big boys do it. Like, this is how the real people do it. Because if you're a serious drug trafficker or even like a serious hacker, you don't want to go to Coinbase and make a completely like undeniable record of all your transactions on the blockchain. Like Bitcoin, yes, it's pseudo anonymous and it can create fantastic privacy and security benefits like for these criminals, but for that to be effective, the cash out process has to be quote unquote off chain, which is cash in bags outside of New York deli.
So how does the FBI get in the mix here?
Yeah, so the FBI gets involved first because they actually spot that somebody is selling this service on a darknet market. They don't say who, but like they have a username across multiple dark web marketplaces that sell drugs, that sort of thing, and somebody's offering a cash out service. So the FBI, starts investigating that. It doesn't really seem to get anywhere. That was back in 2021. Then last year, somebody is arrested because they've been sending packages and packages of cash from a post office in New York. And it turns out it's an alleged member of this ring. So the FBI flips them, and it's like, okay, we have this guy who's inside this ring. How do we then pivot off that? Well, as the CI explains, confidential informant, I think they call it a CS actually in the document. But anyway, the informant explains, well, I have to go meet these people and they give me the cash and that sort of thing. So the FBI just tells them, well, continue doing that, but we're going to wire you up with a camera and we're going to have you go around. And, he goes and he does that and he meets the people, he's recording with some sort of camera. All these photos are in the court records, which is just what makes it a fascinating document. You can go look at them yourself in the article. So he does that. And he only does it for like a few months, like early in the year to like September this year, right? I think something like that. And the informant is given $15 million across that time in like crappy bags. I mean, maybe there were like some bigger shipments that aren't in the court records, but in all, it's like, yeah, our informant moved $15 million, which is just staggering in and of itself to have an informant doing that. But from there, it's pretty easy. It's like, well, we have photos of all of these guys who are doing like pre-sketch stuff. And then the FBI gets their phone records and it shows them, well, this guy drove then to these other states and this person went to these states as well. So they believe that there were drop-offs or pickups at these locations as well. And I guess, all I'll leave it at is that these people were arrested, I believe, and they're charged with running and I think it was an unlicensed money exchange. Like, it doesn't say specifically you're selling to drug traffickers. Like, that's not the charge, or you're not selling to hackers. It's like you're running an unlicensed money exchange in the same way you couldn't just like spin up your own like wire service, I guess, or something like that, So that's how they're getting it. And I do imagine that even if it's not this ring, and maybe it's one in the future, I can see them using RICO against these sort of groups, which is what they used to get the encryptor phone companies, where they weren't criminal entities in themselves because they weren't really doing a crime. Like, it's not a crime to sell an encrypted phone, even to a criminal, but they found a way under US law to treat it as a criminal entity in its own right,
That's crazy. It's crazy to like go to that length to not get caught with the cash in the bags and all this stuff, being very careful. And your guy who's moving your millions is an informant. It's like, I mean, I know we'll never have the answer to that, but it's like, did we not check him for the GoPro on his body? Yes. Wires exist. Like, they just didn't check this guy out. I don't know. He must have been really good. Like, the temptation to take a little off the top would kill me personally. Yep. FBI, don't listen to this. I'll never become an informant anyway, but because I'm not slick enough. But like, that's wild. And like, I mean, it's funny that the blockchain guys are like, well, the passcode thing is crazy. It's like the blockchain mind cannot comprehend this. Like, this is why it's not truly anonymous, is because the only thing that's really anonymous is cash.
Yes.
And it's always been the case.
Well, that was some of the response from the crypto bros in my replies. They were like, what are they actually trading? They're trading cash. Do you want to ban cash? It's like, dude, oh my God, what are you going on about, man?
That was going to be my last question for Joe, which is, why does he hate Bitcoin so much? But before I get to that, I want to make a prediction. And Joe, give me feedback about this prediction. But I think that it's just, we've spent a few years reporting about scams and hacks in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies worth millions and millions of dollars. There was a time there at Motherboard where our colleague Lorenzo, now a wonderful reporter at TechCrunch, just like every other day, it's like 50 million, 250 million, 100K, 200K of stolen Bitcoin. And I predict that all this money of illegally obtained cryptocurrency is just floating around. And it's like, it's time to cash out. Like, these people want to cash out. And as more people start to cash out, we're going to see more and more of this. And there's something kind of novel. I wouldn't say satisfying, but there's something kind of novel and it just like, we're reporting about these giant amounts, but it's all digital. And then you see these court documents, and like you say, it's just like, this is where it all ends up. It's like plastic bags full of cash. And we need to see, there's way more reporting about missing cryptocurrency than there is visible bags of cash. And those two like have to align. You know what I mean? So I predict that we will see a lot more of this.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And as we're recording this, the price of Bitcoin has actually gone up by I don't know 20%, 25%, something like that. And the reason that's interesting is because I think there's a Twitter account called Darkfail. They're sort of a dark web researcher, and they pointed out that darknet markets often exit scam, as in run away with everybody's Bitcoins when the price goes up. Hey, by the way, the price is up by 25% or whatever today. So, maybe we'll see that. And yeah, that's going to result in more people cashing out. All right. Maybe we'll leave that there. But hey, if anybody knows anything about IRL Bitcoin exchanges, I'm really big on that. And I'm actually trying to work on a story on that at the moment. It's a little bit tricky, but hopefully more on that in the future. All right. Let me take us out. As a reminder, 404 Media is journalist founded and supported by subscribers. If you wish to subscribe to 404 Media and directly support our work, please go to 404media.co. You'll get unlimited access to our articles and an ad-free version of this podcast. Another way to support us is by leaving a 5-star rating and a review. Here is one of those reviews from our friend Lorenzo Franceschi Vicari that Emmanuel mentioned earlier. The journalists at 404 Media report and write stories that no one else is doing. I also love that they are giving listeners a behind-the-scenes look at the stories they write about. It's the only place you can hear about these stories because no one else is doing the same work they do. Thank you, Lorenzo. It still counts if it's a review from your friend. This has been
Thanks, Lozo.
See you next week.